What would you do if the man you loved, the man who'd asked you to marry him, looked you in the eyes in a crowded corporate lobby and said to his billionaire boss, "Oh, her, she's just the cleaner from my floor. She must have gotten." What would you do if you stood there in your comfortable jeans and your favorite old sweater, holding the presentation folder he'd forgotten at your apartment, while he smiled that professional smile and gestured dismissively at you like you were furniture? What would you do if his boss, a man in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, actually laughed and said, "Well, make sure she doesn't wander into the executive security protocol. You understand?" I'll tell you what I did. I stood absolutely still in that marble lot, my fingers going numb around the leather folder, and I felt something inside, not hurt, not shock, ice, cold, and final. Because what neither of them knew, what my fiancé Marcus had never bothered to discover, despite 9 months of dating and 3 months of engagement, was that in exactly 4 minutes, 50 royal guards from the Duchy of Hohenberg would emerge from the security elevator where they'd been stationed for an international financial summit. They would see me standing in, and they would execute a synchronized military salute that would stop every conversation, every foot, every breath in that entire building. But let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand how we got here. You need to understand who I was and who I pretended to be, and why the man I loved never had any idea what my name, the name I'd been using for 2 years in New York, was Sophie. Sophie Meyer was 29 years old, worked as a financial analyst at a mid-sized consulting firm, lived in a rent-controlled studio in the Upper West Side, and took the subway to work every morning, her coffee in a travel mug, and her lunch packed in. Sophie Meyer her clothes at Uniqlo. She got her hair cut at a neighborhood. She had student loan debt and a modest 401k, and lived exactly like millions of other young professionals in Manhattan. My actual name is Her Serene Highness Sophia Elizabeth von Hohenberg-Laurent, Crown Princess of the Duchy of Hohenberg, sole heir to the Hohenberg-Laurent Financial Consortium, a family holding company that controlled assets valued at 463 billion. My family had been bankers to European royalty since 1690. We owned or held controlling stakes in 17 major banks across 4 continents. The building I was standing in, the gleaming 60-story tower of glass and steel in Midtown Manhattan, was owned by a subsidiary of one of those banks. I'd come to New York 3 years ago because I was suffocating. Being Crown Princess of Hohenberg meant living in a fishbowl where every conversation was recorded, every relationship strategic, and every man who expressed interest was really interested in the 463 billion euros and the eventual throne. By the time I was 26, I'd been courted by 7 men from appropriate families, attended 43 formal state functions, and given 12 speeches about financial responsibility and heritage. Not one person in my entire life had ever asked me what I was afraid of, or what made me laugh until I couldn't breathe, or what I thought about when I couldn't sleep. I'd gone to my father, Duke Friedrich, with a proposal that had made my security detail actual. I wanted to live as a normal person, work a normal job, and see if anyone could love me myself rather than my title. My father, who'd married my mother in a strategic alliance that had thankfully evolved into genuine affection her death, had looked at me across his desk and said, 2 years, you can have 2 years, but you maintain minimal security coverage, you check in weekly, and the moment I summon you home, you come. Immediate. No argument. Agreed, I'd said. So Sophie Meyer had been born. A complete fabrication, but a legal, with employment history and credit history, and an entire constructed past that would survive anything short of a government-level background check. I'd gotten a real job through real application. I'd rented a real apartment. I'd built a real life. And 9 months ago, I'd met Marcus. Marcus was 33, worked in business development at Titanium Capital, one of the most prestigious investment firms. We'd met at a networking event for young finance, and he'd approached me at the open bar with a self-deprecating joke about how networking events made him want to fake a phone emerge escape. I'd laughed, a real laugh, and we'd spent the next hour hiding in a corner, talking about everything except work, about the best pizza in the city, about whether the High Line was overrated, about what books we'd loved as. He told me he'd grown up in Queens, that his parents had immigrated from Taiwan when he was 5, that his father had worked in a restaurant, and his mother had been a seamstress. He told me about working his way through Coney, about the scholarship to Columbia for his MBA, about the pride he felt the first time he sent money back. He asked for my number. I gave it. Our first date was coffee in Square Park. Our second was dumplings in Chinatown, at a place with plastic chairs and a menu entirely in Chinese. Our third was walking the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset, and when we reached the Brooklyn side, he'd taken my hand and said, "I really like spending time. I hope we can keep doing this." I'd said yes. I'd meant it. For 9 months, we built something that felt real. Marcus was ambitious, but not ruthless. He worked hard because he wanted to prove him, wanted to build something. He took me to his apartment for dinner, and his mother had hugged me like I was already family and insisted take home. He met my college roommate Sarah, who was actually one of my security, and he'd been genuinely friendly and interested in a fabricated graphic design. He proposed 3 months ago on a Saturday morning in my apartment, without fanfare or elaborate planning. We'd been making breakfast, and he'd just stopped, put down the spatula, and said, "Sophie, I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me?" The ring was simple, a small round diamond on a white gold band, something he'd saved for over 4 years. It represented sacrifice and thought and love from someone who believed I was Sophie Meyer, financial analyst, a woman with student loans and a studio apartment and a completely ordinary future ahead of her. I'd said yes while crying into the eggs. That was 3 months, and I'd been trying to figure out how to explain that Sophie was a costume and that underneath was someone else. I'd been constructing the conversation, imagining his reaction, trying to find the perfect moment. But before I could have that conversation, Marcus got promoted, a significant promotion, Senior Vice President of Strategic Partnership, a corner office, a substantial raise, and suddenly, everything. The first incident happened to his promotion, at a dinner with his new colleague. We were at a steakhouse in Midtown, the kind of place where the wine list was leather-bound and the sides cost $20. Marcus had insisted on taking me, had wanted me to meet his new team. I'd worn my nicest dress, a simple black sheath from Banana Republic that I'd bought for job interview. Everyone else at the table in designer labels I recognized from my act. The women wore Prada and Gucci and carried bags that cost more than my monthly rent as Sophie. Marcus's new boss, Richard Pemberton, a billionaire who'd founded Titanium Capital 30 years ago, was holding court at the head of the table. He'd looked at me when Marcus introduced her and said, "Sophie Meyer, and what do you do, sir?" "I'm a financial," I'd said, "at Harrison and Webb." "Harrison and Webb," Richard had repeated, his tone making it clear he considered this a third-tier firm at best. "How nice. And you and Marcus met at a networking." Marcus, too quick. Richard had smiled, not warmly. "How egalitarian. I always tell chips at every, the condescending." Marcus had laughed, actually, like it was a joke, and Sophie's very hard, as if that was the most. The dinner had continued with Richard and his wife Amanda asking me questions that sounded polite, but were really assessment. Where had I gone to school? What did my parents do? Where did I live? Each answer had been met with the particular smile wealthy people give when they've placed you. State school, teacher, Upper West Side studio. Each one a data point, confirming their initial assessment that I was ordinary, unimpressive, someone Marcus had chosen for reasons that baffled, and Marcus had let it happen, had sat there and smiled, and made self-deprecating jokes about our modest lifestyle and how real our relationship compared to the gold digger some of his colleagues. I'd gone home that night and stared at my engagement, wondering if a terrible mistake. The second incident was worse. Richard's wife Amanda had decided to help me by inviting me to lunch with several other Titanium Capital wives and girlfriends. A chance to get to know the community, she'd said. A chance to learn the ropes. I'd met them at a restaurant in Tribeca where the prix-fixe lunch was $95 per person. The 4 women were all immaculately groomed, carrying bags I recognized. Hermes, Chanel, Bottega Veneta. They'd looked at my simple tote from Madewell like it was a fascinating anthropological artifact. "Sophie," Amanda had, her voice dripping with false. "Marcus tells us you work in finance. How wonderful that you have a career. So many young women today just want to marry rich and never work." The implication was clear. I was one of the good ones. I worked. I wasn't just a gold, except of course, they all thought I was exactly that. Just a more patient, strategic. Lunch had been an excruciating 90 minutes of questions about my wardrobe, so practical, my apartment, cozy, my background, public school, how admirable. Every compliment was actually an insult. Every piece of advice. "You know," one of the women, Clarissa, had said while examining my engagement ring with poorly killed disdain, "when you and Marcus get more established, you should really upgrade this. Something that reflects his new position. I can give you my jeweler's number. He's very understanding about payment plans." Payment plan for an engagement ring, because obviously I couldn't afford anything better, and Marcus was too kind to I'd smiled and thanked her and excused myself to the bathroom, where I'd stood in a stall and breathed very carefully and reminded myself that this was temporary, that I could tell Marcus and all of it would stop. But when I'd mentioned the lunch to Marcus that evening, when I'd told him how his colleagues' wives had treated me, he'd said, "They're just trying to help, Sophie. They're from a different world, and they want you to succeed in it. Can't you see that as kindness?" "It wasn't kindness," I'd said. "You're being oversensitive," he'd said. "These people are important to my career. Can you please just make an effort to fit in?" Make an effort to fit in. As if the problem was my failure to perform, rather than that. The third incident was the one that should have ended everything. Richard Pemberton was hosting a cocktail party at his penthouse, a networking event, disguised as a social gathering. Marcus had been anxious about it for days, had asked me 3 times if I was sure I had something appropriate. I'd bought a new dress from Bloomingdale's on sale, but nice. A navy wrap dress that was elegant and appropriate. I'd arrived at Richard's penthouse to find every other woman in, and I'd spent 3 hours systematically ignored, talked over, and dismissed by people who'd calculated my net worth within seconds of meeting and found it in. The worst moment had come when Clarissa, emboldened by pain, had said to a group that included Marcus, "I just think it's so how Marcus is slumming it, little analyst girlfriend. It's very egalitarian, very modern, though I suppose eventually he'll want someone who can actually." She'd said it like I wasn't standing, and Marcus, my fiancé, the man who'd asked me, had laughed, nervous, uncomfortable, and then Sophie's great. She keeps me, as if rather than I'd left the claiming it. Marcus had barely noticed. That was 2 weeks ago, and for 2 weeks, I'd been trying to decide what to do. Tell him the truth and see if the man I'd fallen for was still in there somewhere, or end it and go home and accept that my experiment in normal life had failed. I still hadn't decided when Marcus had called me this. He'd left his presentation, the one with all his materials, for a crucial with Richard and a potential. Could I please bring it? It was an emergency. His entire promotion might depend on this meeting. So I'd grabbed the folder, put on my comfortable jeans and my favorite old sweater, and taken the subway to Midtown, to the gleaming tower where Titanium Capital occupied floors 40 through 50, to the lobby where I now stood, holding his forgotten folder, wearing my ordinary clothes. Marcus was in the lobby when I arrived, not alone, with Richard Pemberton and another man I didn't recognize, someone clearly important based on the deferential way Marcus was standing. They were in the middle of the vast marble lobby, having what looked like an impromptu meeting when I'd approached. "Marcus," I'd said, "you forgot your folder." He'd turned, seen me, and something had flickered across his face. Not relief, not gratitude, something that looked almost like his eyes had gone to my jeans, my sweater, my completely unremarkable appearance. Then they'd gone to Richard and the unknown billionaire, both in their perfectly tailored suits, both now looking at me with polite curiosity. And I'd watched Marcus. I'd watched him calculate the cost of acknowledging versus the cost of, his voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before, a tone of dismissing. "Her? She's just the cleaner from my floor. She must have gotten lost." The words had landed like physical blows, each one precise, each one designed to erase me. Richard had laughed. "Well, make sure she doesn't wander into the executive level. Security protocol, you understand." The unknown billionaire had already lost interest, turning back to Marcus to continue whatever conversation interrupted. And Marcus had taken the folder from my numb hand without meeting my eye, had said, "Thanks, you can go now," and had turned his back on. I stood there in that lobby, in my jeans and my sweater, holding nothing, and I felt the last of Sophie break up inside. Not with sadness, not with heartbreak, with absolute crystalline. The experiment was over. The pretense was done. And in approximately 3 minutes, when the security elevator opened and 50 royal guards emerged from their briefing, Marcus Chen and Richard Pemberton and everyone in this lobby were going to learn exactly what happened when you mistook grace for weakness and kindness. For instance, I reached into my bag, past my wallet, and to the small leather case I kept hidden. Inside was a phone, not my regular, a secure diplomatic phone with exactly 3 contacts programmed in. I powered it on for the first time since I'd left Hohenberg, and I sent a single message, in German, to my head of security. Extraction protocol, immediate. Location, Titanium Building lobby. Authorization, Hofburg 1. The response came in second. Confirmed. Guards deploying now. ETA, 90 seconds. I put the phone away and stood very still in the center of that marble lobby, with its soaring ceiling and its modern art installation and its wealthy people flowing through on their import. Marcus had rejoined his conversation with Richard and the billionaire, his back to the folder I'd been tucked under his. He'd already forgotten. 60 seconds. Around me, the lobby was full of activity. People in expensive suits moving with security guards at their station, receptionists at their marble desks, the elevator banks with their polished steel doors opening and closing in rhythm. 30 seconds. I could hear Marcus laughing at something Richard had said. Professional. The laugh of a man who was doing exactly, unencumbered by the embarrassing girlfriend. 50. The security elevator, the one marked authorized personnel only, the one that went to the top floor conference rooms where international delegations held private meetings, dinged. The sound was soft, but in the marble acoustic of the lobby, it carried. The doors opened, and 50 royal guards of the Duchy of Hohenberg, in full ceremonial uniform, deep blue wool coats with gold braiding, white gloves, peaked caps bearing the Hohenberg crest, marched out in perfect. They weren't rushing. They weren't running. They moved with the synchronized precision of people trained together for years, who could execute complex maneuvers blindfolded, who represented centuries of military tradition. They emerged into the lobby in formation, 5 columns of 10, and they saw me in, because that was their job, to know where I was, always, even when I didn't want. The captain, a man named Klaus who'd been with my family for 20 years, saw me. His eyes found me across the lobby, standing alone in my jeans and sweater, and something moved across his face. Not surprise. He'd known I was in the building, but recognition of something else. Recognition that the pretense was. He barked a command in a single word that carried across the marble. Stillgestanden! 50 pairs of boots hit the marble floor, the sound like thunder. Every conversation in the lobbies, every person turned. The entire building seemed to hold its breath. And then Klaus barked the second command, the one that would end Marcus Chen's career and Richard Pemberton's comfortable assumption and my entire experiment. Salutiere, salute. 50 white gloves, 50 turned to and they were in the middle of a corporate lobby in Midtown Manhattan. 50 royal guards in full ceremonial uniform, executing a military salute reserved exclusively for members of the Hohenberg ducal family. The silence was profound and absolute. Marcus had turned at the first bark of. He was staring at the guards, his face cycling through confusion and shock. Richard Pemberton had gone very still, his eyes moving from the guards to me and back again, his mind clearly working to process. The unknown billionaire had taken a step back, his hand moving toward his phone, probably and I stood in the center, in my jeans, my comfortable sweater, and I looked directly. Klaus was walking toward me now, the other guards holding, and when he reached me, he bowed. A formal bow from the waist, the kind reserved for royalty. Your Serene Highness, he said in German, his voice pitched to carry across the silence. We received your extraction signal. Are you in distress? Do you require immediate I looked at his face, pale and beginning to show the first edges of understanding. At Richard Pemberton beside him, shock giving way to rapid calculation. At the lobby, full of people frozen in, watching, recording on their phone, witness. No, Captain Klaus, I said in loud enough for everyone. I'm not in distress, but I think it's time we. I turned to address Marcus and Richard and every person who was watching. My name is not Sophie Meyer, I said, my voice carrying the shocked. My name is Sophia Elizabeth von Hohenberg-Laurent. I am Crown Princess of the Duchy of Hohenberg and sole heir to the Hohenberg-Laurent Financial Consortium. I have been living in New York under an assumed identity for the past 3 years as part of a personal choice to experience life without the context of my title. I came here this morning to bring my fiancé a folder he'd forgotten, a simple act of love and support, and he repaid that by calling me just the cleaner in front of his boss, because my jeans and sweater embarrassed, because acknowledging me might damage his professional reputation. Marcus's mouth opened, no sound. What he didn't know, what he never bothered to discover, is that this building is owned by Hohenberg Financial Property, a subsidiary of my family's holding. The bank that finances Titanium Capital Management's operation is Hohenberg Private Bank. The largest investor in Titanium Capital itself is the Hohenberg-Laurent family. Richard Pemberton had gone the color of old. My fiancé just called his boss's boss, just the cleaner, I said, and then told her to. I turned back to Klaus. Captain, please contact the Hohenberg family. I want a full report on our relationship with Titanium Capital. Every investment, every loan, every business. I want it on my desk within the hour. Yes, Your Highness, Klaus said. I looked at Marcus one last. This man I'd believe. This man who'd just revealed exactly who he was. We're done, I said, completely done. And Marcus, you're about to learn a very expensive lesson of the consequences of cowardice. I turned to the royal guard forming up around me, and that's when Marcus finally. Sophie, wait. I didn't know. You have to understand. I stopped, turned back. My name is Sophie, and you did know. You knew you knew I had feet. You knew I'd traveled across the city to help you, and you called me a cleaner, and told me to leave, because you were. That tells me everything I need. I walked toward the exit, toward the black SUVs I could see pulling up outside, toward my actual life, and away from the experiment that had just ended in the most definitive way possible. Behind me, I could hear chaos beginning. Richard's voice, frantic, trying to get my. Marcus, desperate, pleading. The lobby erupting in conversation and shock. I didn't look back. The SUVs were waiting outside, exactly as protocol demanded. My full security had assembled. Captain Klaus opened the door of the lead vehicle, and I climbed inside. The leather interior and the familiar scent of the diplomatic car wrapping around me like coming home. Through the tinted window, I could see Marcus burst out of the building, running toward the cars, his face desperate. Security. He was shouting something, but I couldn't hear it through the armored glass. The convoy began to move, pulling smoothly into traffic, and I watched the Titanium Capital building recede through the rear window. It was over. The experiment, the engagement, Sophie Meyer, all of it, over. And I felt nothing but cold, clear. My phone buzzed, the regular phone, not the secure diplomat. A text from Marcus. Please call. I'm so sorry. I didn't. Please. I deleted it. Another. Sophie, Your Highness. I made it. I panicked. Delete. The texts kept coming as the convoy moved through midtown traffic. Apology, explanation, desperate, each one more frantic than the last. I watched them appear and disappear, feeling nothing. The part of me that would have cared, that would have wanted to understand his perspective, had died in that lobby the moment he'd called me a cleaner and told me to. Captain Klaus was on his phone, speaking in rapid German to someone at the family. I caught fragment. Immediate review? All relationships? Her Highness's express instruction. We pulled up to a building on the east side, not my studio. The Hohenberg family maintained a residence here, a full-floor penthouse that I'd never used during my 3 years as Sophie Meyer. Security had clearly made the decision that I wasn't going back to the studio. That part of my life. The elevator required both a keycard and a biometric scan to access the penthouse. When the doors opened, I stepped into a space I'd seen only in photographs. 12,000 square feet of museum-quality, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking art that belonged in galleries. Furniture that had been in my family. It felt like my personal secretary, Wilhelm, was already there, having been summoned from the consulate. He bowed when I entered. Your Serene Highness, welcome home. Home. This wasn't home. Home was a studio apartment with a leaky and neighbors who played music. Home was takeout containers and second-hand furniture and Sunday mornings at the farmer's market. But that home didn't exist. Wilhelm, I said, I need a full briefing on our relationship with Titanium Capital Management. Everything. Holdings, investment, loans, contractual. I want to know exactly how much leverage already being compiled. We should have a complete report within 30 minutes. He paused. I also have your father. He's requesting. Of course. The moment I'd sent that extraction signal, alarms would have gone off. My father would. The entire apparatus of royal protection and diplomatic protocols would have activated. Put him through to the study, I said. I walked through the penthouse to the study, a room I'd never entered before, paneled in dark wood with a desk that had belonged to my great-grand. The phone on the desk. I picked. Father, Sophia. His voice was tight, controlled. Are you injured? Are you safe? Klaus extraction gave minimal. I'm fine. Physically. I'm at the penthouse. What happened? I told. All of it. The lobby, Marcus's words, the decision to end the My father listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long. I'm sorry, he said. Better than. I got I lied, and I got a No, you didn't lie. You didn't lie about your character, your values, your capacity for love. He should have seen those. He should have valued them above everything else. Another pause. Do you want me to come to New York? No. I want you to let me handle them. I want you to trust me. Of course You're my daughter, and you're going to be Duchess. But Sophia, be careful. Revenge feels satisfying, but it has consequences. This isn't revenge, I said. This is consequences. There's a difference. Is there? My father asked. But he didn't sound like he was arguing. He sounded like he was genuinely asking. Yes, I said. Revenge is about inflicting pain for the sake of pain. Consequences are about making sure people understand the actual cost of. Marcus chose to humiliate me. He's about to learn what. My father was quiet. Then, your mother would have handled it exactly the same way. She never suffered for cowards either. Handle it however you see fit, Sophie. You have my full support, and when you're ready to, I'll be with. Thank you. I hung up and found Wilhelm waiting in the doorway with a tablet. The preliminary report, Your Highness. I took it and began reading. The numbers were staggering even to me, and I'd grown up with wealth that most people couldn't comprehend. Titanium Capital Management had assets under management of approximately $83 billion. Impressive, but 47% of their capital came from institutional investors, and of those institutional investors, the single largest was the Hohenberg-Laurent family office at $18 billion. We weren't just investors, we were their largest client. Without our capital, Titanium would shrink by more than 20% overnight. Additionally, Titanium operated on credit facilities from 3 major banks. All 3 banks had Hohenberg family interests as significant shareholders. Our influence in those institutions ranged from 12% to 34% equity position, and the building itself, the gleaming 60-story tower where I'd just been called a cleaner, was owned, as I'd told the lobby, by Hohenberg Financial Property. Titanium Capital's lease was up for renewal in 8 months. Wilhelm, I said, I want a meeting with Titanium's board of directors. Schedule it for tomorrow morning. Tell them it's regarding the Hohenberg-Laurent family office's continued investment in their fund. Yes, Your Highness. And the building lease? Put it under formal review. I want our property management team to examine every obligation, every option. And Wilhelm, make sure Titanium's legal team is aware that let them imagine. Very good, Your Highness. My phone was still buzzing with texts from Mark. I finally looked at the latest. I just got called into Richard's office. They're asking me about our relation. What's happening? Please talk. What's happening? I thought. Is that your boss just realized newest senior vice president is engaged to the woman whose family controls nearly half his firm's assets? What's happening is that every decision you made in that lobby is now being examined in the cold light of consequence. I didn't respond to that. Instead, I called my head of legal, a fierce woman named Dr. Kristin Volker, who'd been managing Hohenberg family legal. Your Highness, she answered. Wilhelm briefed me on this. I'm already reviewing all contracts and agreements with Titanium. Thank you. I want to be very clear about something. I'm not interested in destroying Titanium. They're a well-run firm, and they manage our money competently. But I am interested in making sure Richard Pemberton and Marcus Chen understand the consequences of their action. Understood. May I make a suggestion? Please, instead of pulling our investment, which would be dramatic but ultimately harmful to our own return, we could restructure our relationship with Titanium, convert our passive investment to an active one, demand board seats, institute oversight protocol, make it clear that our continued investment comes with conditions, and those conditions include significant changes to their corporate culture. I smiled. This was why Kristin had been with our family for 2 decades. I liked draft, but Kristin, I want one non-negotiable in any restructured, name it, Marcus Chen's, immediate and public. I don't care what severance, that's between Titanium employment, but he cannot remain employed there if we're going to investment relief. There was a pause. Your Highness, that's a direct personnel in. It could be seen vindictive. It could also be seen as a principal investor, ensuring that senior management maintains standards of integrity and judgment. Marcus Chen demonstrated catastrophically poor judgment. He humiliated his fiancée to impress his boss. What happens the next time he has to choose between personal integrity and professional advance? Can Titanium afford to have someone making decisions who's proven he'll sacrifice anything for career advance? When you put it that way, Kristin, and I could hear the smile in her, it sounds like sound corporate governance. Exactly. Draft the proposal. I want it ready for tomorrow's meeting. I hung up and walked to the window. Central Park stretched out below, the trees just spring green. From this height, the people in the park were invisible, and the distant glitter of. This was not the brick wall I'd stared at my studio window, not the street-level intimacy of neighborhood. My phone buzzed, but this time it wasn't mine. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. I answered. Yes, Your Highness. Richard Pemberton, carefully controlled, but I could hear the tension. I wonder if we might speak about this morning's unfortunate. There's nothing unfortunate. It was very It revealed exactly. Former fiancé? I presume. Correct. Your Highness, I hope you understand that I had no knowledge of your identity or your relationship. Had I known, I would never have. You would never have laughed when he called me a cleaner. You would never have made a joke about security protocols. You would have treated me with respect because of who my family is, rather than because I'm a human being who deserves respect, regardless of my clothes. Silence. That's the problem, miss. You only care about who I am now, that you know what I represent financially, which tells me exactly what kind of man. I understand. I'm not angry. I'm clear. And tomorrow morning, you'll receive a proposal from my legal regarding the restructuring of the Hohenberg-Laurent family with I said it carefully. Your Highness, please, can we discuss this face-to-face? I'm certain we can find a resolution. Tomorrow, at the meeting. Goodbye, Mr. I hung up. Wilhelm, Your Highness, you have several media requests. Word has apparently spread about this morning's TMZ has footage of the Royal Guard salute. It's already been viewed 4 million. Of course it has. 50 guards in full ceremonial executing a salute in a corporate lobby. That wasn't something you saw at Manhattan. Deny all media requests, I said. Issue a standard statement through the consulate. Something about Crown Princess concluding her private sabbatical and resuming her official. No details about what prompted the end of the. Very good. Also, Marcus Chen is in the lobby down. He's requesting to see you. Security. I walked to the window and looked down. 60s. Invisible. Marcus making a tell security. If he returns, they're authorized to call NYPD and have him arrested for trespass. Yes, Your Highness. Wilhelm left. I stood at the window and felt the full weight of what I'd just done settling over. I'd ended my engagement. I'd triggered a corporate crisis. I'd revealed my identity to the entire world. There was no going back to Sophie. That door was my phone, but a text from Sarah, my college roommate, who was actually part of my security. Saw the news. Are you okay? Do you need anything? I texted back. I'm fine. Thank you for 3 years of excellent coverage. You can stand down now. Resume your actual assignment. Her response came quickly. It was an honor, Your Highness. For what it's worth, I thought he was wrong for you from the start. You deserve better. I smiled, despite even my security guard opinions. The sun was setting over Central Park. The light was golden. In my old apartment, in my old life, I'd be making dinner now. Maybe Marcus would come over. We'd cook together, talk about our days, watch something mindless on TV. That life was gone. I spent the night in the penthouse, in a bedroom I'd never slept in, between sheets with a thread count that was genuinely absurd. Wilhelm had arranged for my belongings from the studio to be packed and transported, though he'd asked if I wanted to go through them first, or if he should have staff handle. Staff can handle it, I'd said, because I couldn't face going back there. Couldn't face seeing the apartment where Marcus proposed, where we'd built a life that turned out to be a fiction. I didn't sleep well. I kept reaching for my phone to text Marcus some random thought, then remembering. Kept waking up thinking I heard his key in the lock, then remembering he'd never been to this apartment, would never be here. By 6 a.m. I gave up on sleep. I showered in a bathroom with heated marble floors and a shower system that had more things than my first car. I dressed in clothes that had been brought from storage, the kind of clothes Princess Sophia wore, instead of the jeans and sweat. Sophie Meyer, heels, subtle but still managed more than most people. I looked in and barely read. Wilhelm had breakfast. The board meeting with Titanium Capital was at 9. Kristin had sent over the proposal at midnight, a masterful piece of legal architecture that would restructure our investment relationship while leaving Titanium no real choice but to our terms, including the termination. At 8:30, my phone rang. Marcus. I let it go to voice. He'd called 17 times since yesterday, left 12 voicemails I hadn't listened, sent 43 texts I'd deleted without reading. At 8:45, the convoy assembled downstairs. Not just cars this time, full diplomatic security, because Princess Sophia didn't take the subway. Princess Sophia didn't walk through Manhattan in jeans. Princess Sophia traveled with protection and protocol, and all the apparatus of. We pulled up to the Titanium Capitol building at 8:55, the same building where I'd been called a cleaner 24 hours earlier. But this time, when I emerged from the armored SUV in my Armani suit, with my security detail in, the doorman actually bowed. The lobby reception desk stood up. People stopped and stared. Richard Pemberton was waiting at the elevator, his face carefully neutral. Your Highness, thank you for. Let's not pretend this is a social call, Mr. Pemberton. The elevator ride to the 50th floor was silent. The conference room where Titanium's board was waiting was all glass and steel and million-dollar views. 8 board members, all standing when I entered, all doing rapid calculations about what this meeting meant for their position. I sat at the head of the, not because anyone offered me the seat, but because it was mine by the Hohenberg-Laurent family office was the largest investor. This was Kristin distributed copies. I watched the board members read, watched their faces change as they understood the scope of what we were demanding. Board seats, oversight committee, quarterly reviews, cultural audits, compensation, and there, on page 14, paragraph 7, subsection C, as a condition of the Hohenberg-Laurent family office's continued investment, Titanium Capital Management agrees to the immediate termination of Marcus Chen, Senior Vice President of Partnership, for conduct unbecoming and demonstrating catastrophic poor judgment in matters of investor. Richard Pemberton read it twice, put the document down, looked at. Your Highness, I understand your personal feelings about Mr. Chen's behavior, but this is an employment matter. We have processes, procedure. We can discipline him, certainly, but outright termination at an investor's demand is unusual. I'm aware, but Mr. Chen's behavior didn't just hurt me personally. It demonstrated a fundamental flaw in him. He chose to humiliate someone professional. He lied to his boss about a relation. He showed that when faced with a choice between integrity and advancement, he will choose advancement every time. Is that the kind of senior executive Titanium Capital wants making strategic decisions? The board members were silent. Furthermore, I continued, Mr. Chen was in a personal relationship with a representative of your largest investor for 9 months. He proposed marriage. And in all that time, he never bothered to learn anything real, never asked deeper questions, never investigated my background beyond the surface. What does that say about his due diligence capability? Would you trust him to vet a potential acquisition with the same level of social investigation he applied to? One of the board members, a woman named Patricia Thornton, actually nodded. This isn't about revenge, I said. This is about standard. If Titanium Capital wants to continue managing Hohenberg-Laurent money, you need to maintain executives who demonstrate integrity, judgment, and basic human decency. Mr. Chen failed on all 3 counts, publicly, while wearing your company's ID. Richard Pemberton looked at his board, at their faces, at their careful non-reaction. He was doing the math. $18 billion of investment at stake, more than 20% of their assets under management. The potential cascade of other investors following Hohenberg-Laurent's lead if we pulled out. We'll need to consult with legal about the employment implications, he said finally. Consult with whoever you need to consult with, I said. But understand that this is non-negotiable. Either Mr. Chen is terminated today, or the Hohenberg-Laurent family office begins the process of withdrawing our investment. You have until 5 p.m. to decide. I stood. The meeting was over. Richard, Your Highness, may I speak with you privately? I nodded. The board filed out. Kristin stayed, positioned by the door. I want to apologize, Richard said, for my behavior, for laughing, for the security comment. It was inappropriate regardless, but you wouldn't be apologize if you didn't know who I am. That's the point. You don't actually regret you regret the consequence. That's not isn't it? If I'd been Sophie Meyer, just a financial analyst, would you be in this room right now offering apologies? Or would you have forgotten the incident 5 minutes after it happened? He didn't answer. That's what I thought. You can keep your apology. I don't want it. I want Marcus Chen terminated. I want a letter from Titanium's board formally acknowledging that his behavior violated company value. And I want it done today. Those are my terms. I walked out of the conference, out of the building, back into the convoy of SUVs, back to the penthouse where I was now apparently. At 4:30 that afternoon, Wilhelm brought me a call from Richard Pemberton. Your Highness, the board has voted unanimously to accept the restructuring proposal in its entirety. Mr. Chen has been terminated, effective immediately. His security access has been revoked, and he's been escorted from the building. You'll have a formal letter from the board by end of business. Thank you, Mr. Pemberton. For what it's worth, he said. You were right about the judgment issue. We should have seen it ourselves. Yes, you should have. I hung up and stood at the window, looking out over Central, and I felt not satisfaction, not vindication, nothing. Marcus was fired. His career was probably destroyed. His reputation in New York finance was finished. No firm would touch after being terminated at the explicit demand, and I'd done it. I'd ended him professionally with the same casualness he'd used to dismiss me personally. My phone buzzed. One last text from Marcus's number. I hoped you couldn't do. I stared at that. Then I blocked. Because he was wrong. I'd loved the man but that man had never actually. I'd loved a performance, a carefully constructed presentation, a fiction as complete as Sophie Meyer herself. And when the moment came, choose between love and career, between integrity and advance, between me and his professional image, he'd chosen, immediate, without hesitation. He'd called me a cleaner and told me to. Everything that happened after that was just consequence. True power, I'd learned over 3 years of pretending not to have any, isn't about the size of your, or the weight of your title, or the number of guards who salute when you enter. True power is knowing exactly what you're worth and refusing to accept treatment that diminishes. It's standing in a lobby in jeans, a sweater, while someone calls, and knowing with absolute certainty that in 3 minutes the entire world will shift and that person will learn the most expensive lesson. It's that cowardice that you can't build a relation and expect truth to magic when convenient. Marcus Chen learned, Richard Pemberton learned that. And I learned my own lesson, that the man who loves you for a carefully curated performance will abandon you the moment the performance becomes inconvenient. That real love requires courage, and courage can't be faked or forced or found when you need it if it wasn't there to begin with. I stayed in New York, settling Sophie Meyer's affairs, closing that chapter of my life with methodical finality. The studio apart was sublet. The job at Harrison & Webb was resigned with appropriate. The friends I'd made as Sophie were told the truth, or as much of the truth as security protocol. And then I went home, back to the palace and the duchy and the life back to being princess instead of Sophie. My father was waiting. He pulled me into an embrace and said, "Welcome home, I'm proud of you." For what? For getting my heart broken? For destroying a man's career? For knowing when to walk away? For standing up for yourself? For teaching people that grace should never be mistaken for weakness? He was right. I knew he would. But some nights, alone in my rooms at the palace, I still thought about a Saturday morning in a studio apartment in the Upper West Side, about scrambled eggs and a simple ring and a man who'd asked me to marry him, believing I was nobody special. That moment had been real. I was sure of it. Everything after might have been lies and performance and cowardice, but that moment had been real. And then it had ended. The moment he'd chosen his career over my dignity. Everything after that was just the world catching up to a decision that had already. What did you think of this story of royal justice and devastating consequence? Did Marcus Chen get exactly what he deserved when the crown princess he called a cleaner destroyed his career with the same casual dismissal he'd used to erase her? Did you feel the satisfaction when 50 royal guards saluted her in that lobby and everyone who'd underestimated her finally understood what they'd done? If you loved watching a coward learn that humiliating someone to impress your boss costs everything, when that someone turns out to own the building and control your company's largest investment, then smash that like button, share this with everyone who's ever been judged by their clothes instead of their character, and subscribe to this so you never miss another story of hidden perfect karma and the moment when people who mistake kindness for weakness learn exactly how wrong they are. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have given Marcus a second chance, or was his career destruction exactly the lesson he needed? Because I think we all know that some mistakes are too expensive to forgive, and some people only understand consequences when those consequences cost them everything they thought they couldn't lose.